All right. The state may present its opening statement. Mr. Truman.
Your Honor, before we begin, on behalf of everyone at the defense table, there is an extremely bright light behind you. I don't know if it's a reflection off of something, but it's very distracting from this point of view, and we're having trouble even concentrating. I believe it's a reflection off of a screen to your right.
Yes. This one?
Yes.
This right here?
Yes.
It's this, Judge.
What is it?
If it could be tilted or
Okay.
something.
Is there anything we can do about that? Is that going to affect
That's much better. Thank you.
broadcast media that we have here?
Fine, Judge.
And I can turn up these lights a little bit.
That was the problem, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. All right, now, Mr. Truman, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
On February the 5th of 2019, Michael Cochran was a 200-pound, healthy 38-year-old man. By midday of February 6th of 2019, he had lost consciousness and he would never regain consciousness. He died in hospice care 5 days later, February 11th of 2019. How did this happen? Why did it happen? For an answer to that, look no further than this defendant's conduct. As you were told, the state has no direct evidence, the kind of stuff that makes TV shows exciting, the kind of stuff prosecutors love, jurors love. There is no DNA. There is no evidence of fingerprints. There are no videos of what happened. But as Judge Kirkpatrick will instruct you at the end of this, circumstantial evidence is just as valid as that type of direct and scientific evidence. And there is a ton of evidence of this defendant's guilt. All circumstantial. So how did this happen? How did this healthy 38-year-old man go into a state of unconsciousness and never come back from that? On the morning of February 6th of 2019, this defendant advised her friend and neighbor, Jennifer Davis, that she had been sick all night, 103-degree temperature. And she had previously advised that she had cancer and was under chemo treatment. And that chemo treatment, the effects of which were somewhat negated by insulin. There were no diabetics in the Cohcran house. And there's no evidence that this defendant was taking insulin to counteract any of a child who was a severe diabetic had insulin. The defendant knew that. Jennifer Davis, being a good friend, sends her husband with insulin to the defendant's house that morning. About noonish, one way or the other, Michael Cochran collapses in the Cochran house kitchen. Now, the defendant gives various versions of what she saw, what she heard, and what she did, but there's no question that he was unconscious by about 12:20 or so. How do we know that? She took a picture of him and sent that picture to a number of people, showing him in a collapsed state in their kitchen. Did she call 911? No. Did she load him into a car and take him to the yard? No. What did she do? She called 2 construction guys that worked for her. They took Michael Cochran from the kitchen floor and put him on the couch, where he would remain for the rest of the day, some at least 6 hours or so. That's an unusual reaction for somebody to take with their spouse. She did, in addition to calling the construction workers, you'll hear from him, Jason Bowen, who helped move Mr. Cochran to the couch. She called a trooper friend of theirs, J.B. Hamilton. J.B. Hamilton came to the Cochran residence. He saw Michael on the couch. Michael was not conscious, and he was concerned. J.B. Hamilton is married to Stephanie Hamilton, and she is a physician's assistant. They get some medical attention. Stephanie Hamilton came to the house. She looks at Michael Cochran, and she tells her he needs to be checked. Did the defendant do that? No. Let him lay on the couch. Roughly 3 hours later, things have deteriorated to the point where Michael loses control of his bladder and urinates on himself. Did that event trigger any action by the defendant? Did it seek medical care for her husband, who's on the couch and unconscious now for a number of hours? No. She and her sister changed his clothes and left him on the couch. By 6-ish or so that evening, Michael's best friend, Chris Davis, comes to the house. Chris Davis takes charge. Says, we're going to the hospital. The defense says, oh, he don't want to go. He don't want to go. Of course, nobody could ask him because he was unconscious. Chris Davis says, we're taking him to the hospital. They do. They go to Raleigh General Hospital. But the damage has been done. You'll hear from a couple of doctors to explain the significance, but for now, just keep these numbers in mind. According to the defendant, Michael Cochran's blood glucose level was in the 140s during the day. She reports that to a couple people. He gets to Raleigh General Hospital, and it was 21. 21. That may mean nothing to you right now, but keep that number in mind. Now, Michael Cochran's mom was 10 minutes from his house. She's a retired, registered nurse. Did the defendant contact her? Oh, she did about 10 o'clock that night by text saying, they're going to have to take Michael from Raleigh General to CAMC. All the opportunities to get help to this man, and she took none of them. After being in CAMC for a few days, he's transferred to hospice. He's there roughly 5 hours and dies. His cause of death was damage to his brain caused by insulin. You'll know that because a couple of doctors will testify. A Dr. Rebate and a Dr. Krieger will tell you how the effects of insulin just basically destroyed this man's brain. Glenda Epperly, an experienced RN and a hospice nurse, said she had never seen a body come out of hospice that looked so good. This was a healthy man until she did him in. Now that answers the how. Why? Why would this happen? And why would it happen when it happened? Well, as the defense counsel informed you during questioning, the defendant had run a Ponzi scheme, a big one, where millions of dollars were taken from friends, relatives, local professionals. As many deceptions and lies as were told to her victims of the Ponzi scheme, Michael Cochran was told just as many. He did not know what was going on, but he was determined to find out because people were saying, hey, we invested in your company in this plan and we're not getting our money back. And he was frustrated. He was very frustrated. But the same excuses provided by the defendant to all of her victims in the Ponzi scheme were being provided to Michael Cochran too. It's everybody's fault under the sun. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars in their money stuck in a bank in Virginia, Bank of America. That's what she told Michael Cochran. That's what he believed. So Michael Cochran is going to straighten this out. They charter a flight from Beckley to the Bank of America branch in Lynchburg, Virginia for the 6th of February, 2019. Mysteriously, the defendant cancels that trip in early morning hours. Why was that trip so important? Because Michael Cochran and everybody else would know at that point. There is no money in the Bank of America in Virginia. There's never been any money in the Bank of America in Virginia. There are no government contracts, which is what she was selling to most of Raleigh County, it seems like. Those were fictitious things that she made up and built millions of dollars out of her victims. Now, we're not going to pretend Michael Cochran didn't get a benefit from this. He did. The defendant and her family lived a very lavish lifestyle with other people's money. And Trooper Heinzman will explain to you in an overview, because this case isn't the Ponzi scheme case. That one's over. This is the Werner case. But he'll explain to you how the defendant did this and how she was able to pull this off for so long and how she got so many people to forfeit their money to her. That was all going to blow up on February 6th. And it would have been over February 6th. But of course, the Cochrans never made it from Beckley to Lynchburg. And Michael Cochran is dead because of this. By the way, in case you've forgotten from some of your questioning, this defendant is a pharmacist. She knows about medications and drugs. Beyond that, she held herself out as a specialist in diabetic counseling. She knew the impact insulin would make. That's our case, all circumstantial. And at the end of it, we'll be asking you to find the right verdict and find this defendant guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
Oh, let's take a pause. We got to take a pause for the cause. Oh my goodness. So there we have it. First opening statement of the day, part 1 of this new trial, the Ponzi scheme wife trial. Okay, so what we learned, let me say welcome back to the Nigeria Box, Catherine. Welcome back, Kathy. Welcome back, Bougie. Thank y'all for joining. Of course, I already know you guys have hit the gavel on that like button. Thank you. I'm gonna have to do that. Okay. Anywho, so what do y'all think about that opening statement from the prosecution? What did we learn? We learned already that I heard some it's a circumstantial case. Okay, so we're not gonna see a bunch of videos. We're not gonna have to hear no bunch of DNA testing, none of that stuff, right? It's a circumstantial case. They already saying there's no smoking gun. However, we know now, according to the prosecution, Natalie, the defendant, is a pharmacist. She's a pharmacist specialized in diabetic counseling. She has claimed at that point in time in 2019 that she was suffering from cancer and that insulin helped that. And I guess she ran out of her life-saving insulin and borrowed some from her neighbor. Same time she borrowed some insulin from her neighbor, that same day her husband, 38 years old, for all appearances and everything else, even after the autopsy, he was a healthy man. 38 young man, healthy man. And he falls out and collapses on the kitchen floor around noon, and she don't take him to the hospital. She don't take him to the hospital. She don't call 911, but she does call, according to the prosecution, she calls some construction workers, to come and pick her husband up off the kitchen floor and put him on the couch. Well, he unconscious. For some reason, it's a parade of people that all come through in and out the house, all her friends and associates. Nobody tells her to take him to the doctor. It's not that she tells her best friend that he come and say, we're going to take him to the hospital. The prosecution say his mama lived 10 minutes away. A retired nurse. She didn't call the victim, the unalived victim, in this case, Michael. She didn't call her mother-in-law and say, come check on your son. She didn't call the mother-in-law and say, we take him to the hospital. She didn't call the mother-in-law till 10 o'clock that night when they was almost moving the man to hospice. Now, that's all the state is saying. She used that borrowed insulin from her neighbor to poison him with, and then sat there and let him deteriorate to the very last moment that she could before taking him to the hospital. We learned that the cause of death in this trial is damage to brain caused by insulin. The state also set forth the motive, right? They say the motive is she didn't want to be exposed by her husband or found out by her husband about a Ponzi scheme she had been running. She didn't ran that Ponzi scheme and ran it on her family's friends, co-workers, the community, some of his family. And so they want us to, the state is saying, because of that, what she had going on, people start complaining to him because it's family and friends and co-workers, and the husband didn't know. He didn't. Now the state, now that's kind of strange. He didn't know nothing about the shell company. He didn't know nothing about the Ponzi scheme. He didn't know nothing about the scam. And so he starts snooping. And when he starts snooping, they say the motive is at that moment in time, Natalie Cochran decided it was time to get rid of her husband, Michael. Okay? So that's what I gathered from that opening statement. It was a lot. It was a lot, that does not fare well as far as from opening statements for the defendant. Okay. I liked and enjoyed his opening statement. Clear, concise, to the point, short and sweet. Okay. So now we finna get into opening statements put forth by the defense. I am so interested in knowing how are they gonna explain all these things that common sense say that you just should do. Let's see. Sorry about that.
May it please the court, counsel for the state. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, by the prosecution's account, and perhaps by some other accounts, Natalie Cochran is not a nice person. She defrauded friends, relatives, investors. She was involved in a Ponzi scheme. She cheated, she scammed. And she has paid for it. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the fact that she is perhaps a fraud and perhaps a cheat.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't take the picture down. My bad.
To invite her home for Sunday dinner.
Oh, Lord. I didn't even put it on the screen. Hold on. Oh, Lord. Let me start it over. My bad. Got to be more careful. It's a Monday, you guys. Okay. Let me make it on this cold Monday. All right, there we go.
Jury counts. Natalie Cochran is not a nice person. She defrauded friends, relatives, investors. She was involved in a Ponzi scheme. She cheated, she scammed.
Okay, Livin.
And she has paid for it. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the fact that she is perhaps a fraud and perhaps a cheat, and that you wouldn't perhaps want to invite her home for Sunday dinner, that you wouldn't like her, does not translate into being a murderer. This trial is not a forum on public acceptance. You don't have to like her. You don't have to say she is a great person, but you have taken the oath to judge her fairly and to give her a fair shake, a fair trial. When you took the oath, it's not just some wave of a hand. It is a solemn oath to search for the truth and to determine what really happened in this case. Now, the prosecutor presented a very nice theory, except that before that, again, I'm Matthew Victor. I represent Natalie Cochran with my co-counsel, Mr. Stanley Seldon. We represent somebody, again, who is perhaps dishonest in her financial dealings, but who didn't kill anybody, let alone her husband, her only man in her life, a man, father of her 2 children, and a man with whom she was enamored ever since she laid eyes on him in high school. She's not a murderer, as the evidence will show. Now, she is accused here by the state of West Virginia of one of the vilest crimes there is known. And I will submit to you that the state's motive in this case, as they presented to you, is absolute nonsense. The state of West Virginia is trying to tell you that my client, Natalie Cochran, who has lived with a man who was up to his eyeballs in the Ponzi scheme, somehow detected that he was on her. He was already detecting that she was committing a major fraud, and he was going to run straight to the federal government. Well, think about it, ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to the evidence. The state would want you to believe that he didn't know anything about the Ponzi scheme, didn't know anything about millions of dollars and the lavish lifestyle. He didn't know anything about this, even though the evidence will show that he was signing all these contracts, he was working on the contracts, he was signing checks, and you will see that evidence, you will hear that evidence. And all of a sudden, he found out that Natalie Cochran, his beloved wife, is a fraud and a cheat. And what was he gonna do? No, he was not gonna go and talk to her and try to resolve this case somehow, get a lawyer, or no. The evidence will show, well, at least the state's evidence will show, that she's gonna run to the federal government and turn her and her in and have the dear wife, the mother of his children, locked up in prison. Well, okay, think about that. As you listen to the evidence, be aware of the fact that she, that is Ms. Cochran, does not have to prove herself innocent. The state has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt to demonstrate that Natalie Cochran killed her husband with premeditation, deliberation, and malice. And that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence will show the state cannot do. They cannot do it. You will see exhibits, you will see documents here, consider it all. But what comes to mind immediately is that bottle of insulin. And I will submit to you that this is a smokescreen that the state is going to present to you. You will hear the expert testimony and evidence that this type of insulin could not kill anybody. And for that matter, that the amount of insulin that may have been given to Michael Cochran would not kill him. The state will not tell you exactly what happened that day. Well, they will tell you what they believe happened that day after Mr. Cochran was allegedly shot with this insulin. But what they will not tell you is that if you are shot with a injection of insulin, you're not going to drop unconscious immediately. Think about what would happen if somebody injected you with insulin. Would you react? Would you call 911? Now let's think about it. Let's also think about the fact that the evidence in this case is not exactly what the state believed you to be. Mr. Cochran was a 38-year-old man who died, and the question still remains, what did he die of? You will hear medical evidence that Mr. Cochran was not a healthy 38-year-old man. In fact, to the contrary, between the late 2017 and the time of his death in 2019, he was in the hospital 4 times. For what? For life-threatening conditions. He was a ticking bomb, the evidence will show, health-wise. He suffered from a plethora of medical conditions that could easily end up his life. What's more, you will hear the evidence that Mr. Cochran fancied himself to be a bodybuilder. He wanted to be the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe. And what did he do to that in that regard? Mr. Cochran has imported, well, let's call it medication, from Mexico, online, from sources that were not approved by any FDA or any legitimate American government sources. And he was taking medication, steroids, that were not for human consumption. That there was some animal medication taken only by the animals. So consider that. Consider that. He was not a healthy man. He was in the hospital in 2017 for his back problems. That's maybe even disregard that. But he was again in the hospital for mold exposure, with the symptoms similar to what happened to him in February of 2019. He hated the hospitals, the evidence will show. He told everybody that if they ever took him to the hospital, it would be a waste of money, and he would not want to stay in a hospital. But 2 days later, he was again in a hospital with the same conditions, even worse. Somehow he survived. His medical conditions, you will hear, involve the swelling of the brain, convulsions, perhaps epilepsy. You will hear all that evidence. He was not a healthy man. And he refused to take medications. He was pumping himself with steroids and whatever other medication there was that he could get from less than legitimate sources. And you have to consider that in arriving at your verdict. Secondly, the evidence will show that the state's medical evidence as such is going to be easily discredited by the expert evidence of people who expert witnesses who will tell you that this type of medication, what he had, could not have killed this man. And on top of that, the facts of the case are also different from what the prosecution told you. In fact, the insulin, you will hear about all this insulin. This is a smokescreen. The insulin that my client had in her possession was the insulin that Mr. and Mrs. Davis gave her repeatedly. Why? Because they had a diabetic son. And Natalie was an expert in administering that medication because their next door neighbor had a son who had diabetes 1. Sad to hear that, but that's the reality of it. It was not a one-time deal. She was in fact entitled to go to the pharmacy and get that medication, pick up the medication for Mr. and Mrs. Davis's son. So the fact that she had any insulin in her home is of no import. Furthermore, the state will present the evidence that they found a bottle of insulin in her home. We will, however, present to you that that bottle of insulin was first of all full. So nobody took that insulin. Second of all, that insulin was found in the refrigerator 4 months after Mr. Cochran's death. That insulin is completely irrelevant, as the evidence will show. The state wants you to believe that Ms. Cochran, as a pharmacist, is knowledgeable of the insulin because she wanted to kill her husband. The evidence, however, will show that Ms. Cochran, as a pharmacist, is also known to have great knowledge of any other substances that could kill, undetectable, untraceable. And so consider this evidence. Let's assume that the state is right on everything. Consider the fact that this
Cold-blooded killer
borrows a murder weapon from a neighbor to kill her husband with the insulin that involves now a couple of witnesses. Then she places that medicine in her refrigerator, the evidence of the crime, apparently, according to the state, for 4 months. And then she somehow does not use any other substances that she knows of because she is a pharmacist. That theory is absurd, ladies and gentlemen. Truly. And now, the kicker. She has an absolute power to hide the evidence. And the evidence will show that she had never cremated her husband. So he was exhumed, his body was exhumed, so that the state would prove something, which the state cannot, but at least they try. And we will submit to you that if she had cremated the late Mr. Cochran's body, there would have been no case. There would have been any case. Now, you will hear the evidence about her chemo treatment. You will hear the evidence about her health. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, after all of that, you will come to the realization that the state's case doesn't make any sense. And you will not be able to answer your own question, perhaps. What did this man die of? Certainly not the insulin injection. And the evidence will also show that Mr. Cochran by the state's own admission, was enjoying the benefits of Ms. Cochran's fraud. Well, that's another red herring. He was involved in the Ponzi scheme. He knew about multi-million-dollar purchases, the toys, the houses, trips to Paris, trips to Hawaii, expensive, lavish lifestyle. And you have to ask yourself at the end of the case, he didn't know about it? Really? He didn't know how this money was generated? He who wrote all the contracts for the government, for the non-existing purchases? If you cannot answer these questions, then you have to acquit the defendant. This is a complex case, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. But it's built by the state of West Virginia on conjectures and innuendos. It is rich on spurious conclusions and speculations, but it's thin on facts. And glaringly lacking in motive and the evidence necessary to prove that my client killed her husband. At the end of the case, we will ask you to find her not guilty. Thank you.
Ooh.
Members of the jury,
Wait a minute, let's pause. Ooh, that's what I'm gonna say right now, because I literally was very doubtful of how could they come back and rebuttal against what the state has said, because it just didn't make sense. But I do believe, and if you guys in a position where you can type and let me know what y'all think. I think the defense actually put on a good opening statement. It started off kind of shaky and weird when he was calling his, acknowledging the fact that, hey, my client may not be a nice person. She might be a scammer. She might be a thief. You may not want to invite her over for dinner. Let her in your house. I was like, dang, he gonna have to get to the good parts. But he eventually got there. One of the key points to me is I question my own self. Are you able to be in a marriage with somebody and be a business partner with them and don't know they running a $2.5+ million scam? You signing contracts or fake contracts you didn't know. So that's what the defense saying, that the victim knew about it. It was no threat of him outing her. He knew about it. He played a part in it. So that's not the motive, right? And then I like the point he made. That's where he said about the defendant by being a pharmacist alone. Why would she use something when she had it at her hands, at her convenience, a plethora, to use one of his words, of different drugs and stuff like that she could have used to unalive him that would go unnoticed. Winter says, that steroid use may be a serious question because that will cause damage to the brain and body. Absolutely. Another great point. That he brought out the fact that that the man used foreign, not USDA approved steroids. That could have been the culprit. Now it kind of got a little weird when he said the man went to the hospital 4 times for life-threatening conditions, and then he came back and said one of the times he went to the hospital for back problems. And then he said mold. That was kind of tricky the way he tried to make it sound and what he came back with. But hey, they just getting started, right? Another fact that he laid out there that made me say, was he said that the bottle of insulin that was found in the house was found 4 months later after he'd already passed away, and that the bottle was full. That's interesting. And quite honestly, when I'm just looking at it, wow, that's what I would say. If she a pharmacist and got access to insulin and all that kind of stuff at the pharmacy, she could have easily, she already stealing millions of dollars from people. We already know she's morally bankrupt. Why not just steal some insulin from the pharmacy? Why even go borrow something from the neighbor, whereas someone can say, hey, I just gave her some insulin? You know, and if she's smart enough to pull off a scheme, a Ponzi scheme for a while, to fool all these people, family, friends, co-workers, church members, and all that, then she's not a dummy. Pharmacy keeps tabs of the meds. Correct. But she could have doctored up some stuff. She could have put a little extra insulin on somebody else's thing. You know what I'm saying? Where there's a will, there's a way living. Right? But absolutely, I get what you're saying. You know, maybe she didn't want to start no problem, kick up no problem at the job at the pharmacy and get that involved. Makes sense to me. So it's a, let me see if I see anything else that stuck out to me. Now, it was some good points. I feel like I'm absolutely amazed and shocked that he was able to come back with some good points that made me say, ooh. I say, oh my. So again, it seemed kind of interesting. It seemed kind of interesting, you guys. This is part 1 of the new trial. Watch, we're starting the daytime trial. The Ponzi, hold on, let me see. The Ponzi scheme wife trial.